We'll talk about the purposes of pilot testing, using mixed methods in pilot testing, and overall guidelines for pilot testing. A pilot test is a small scale preliminary study to kind of rehearse what you're being planned or what's being planned for a big study. They can save time, money, and heartache by catching things that you need to fix before you go to full scale with your study or your project. So, what is the purpose of a pilot test? So, the purpose is to really look at and investigate some very specific things to see if your sampling technique is effective, to see if the folks you're talking to understand your instrument, see if the directions are clear, see if the questions are in a good sequence, stuff like that. To understand the true length of your interview or your survey. So you may think it's only 5 minutes, but when people get into it, maybe it's 10 minutes, or maybe you thought it was 5 and it's really looking like at a 3-minute survey. You can look at estimated response rates to see how people take it and how they respond to it. You can make sure your resources are sufficient and your staff that is administering the survey understand it and are able to do it correctly. Then when you get on the back end, you can look at overall analysis of the data and overall feasibility of your study. And so we mentioned mixed methodology in pilot testing. And really what I like to do here is look at qualitative pilot testing for a quantitative study. So if you're looking at you're looking for some large scale number data, using a pilot test that really gets at a little bit more depth to get you to understand the questions you're asking and maybe flush out some nuances. And then the opposite, if you're looking at a qualitative study where you're going to look a little bit more depth, is looking at a quantitative pilot test to really look at some hardcore numbers to make sure you're looking in the right direction. Let's look at some general pilot testing guidelines. You want to make sure you seek permission from an institutional review board or something similar at your institution or agency. Make sure you get approval at the pilot site if necessary. Look at a convenient sample to begin with, so somebody you can go in and get information from pretty quickly and easily for a pilot test. Make sure your sample matches the actual study group. So, you're going to look at a convenient sample, but you want to look at how that matches your potential study group. Make sure you use a small sample size. So you're looking at getting good data as quickly as you can to kind of look at the instrumentation, the process, not so much the outcomes as far as what the data actually says. Make sure that the pilot, that everything helps you plan for the big study. So as you look through the pilot, the process and all that, it's going to help you plan the big study. You want to make sure that whoever is used in the pilot study is not in the participants for the primary study, right? And you want to make sure the data you collect during the pilot study isn't used in the primary study either. So you're looking at making sure that you don't include the subjects or the data. And so the other part that I would really recommend is when you're doing a final report or you're doing a final manuscript or whatever it may be, you want to acknowledge that you did a pilot test in some way, whether it's a smaller, quicker version of the bigger study, or again, if you used a qualitative pilot for the quantitative study, or vice versa. So some different things. Let's look at some different ways to pilot test. The first one is you can ask an expert who knows about your topic, maybe an expert in an academic area or an expert in a profession area, to provide feedback on what they think your research design should be to look into a topic or a subject. You can ask participants who are like your potential sample to take your survey. Then you could ask them which parts were confusing or need revising. So looking at a small group of people to take your survey and then provide feedback. You can have potential participants explain to you what they think your questions mean to see if they are interpreting them like you had intended. So make sure your questions or your statements are very clear.